Okay, in this video we're going to take a look at Gem on Curve. So let's go over to the Categories panel and go to Gems, and then here is Gem on Curve. Now, if you pre-select the curve and click this button, it will put the gems out on the curve automatically because it knows what curve you want to use. If you don't pre-select the curve and you click that builder, it's going to say, hey, select the curve, and then away we go. Okay, so I usually pre-select, but if you don't remember to, it still asks. So that's how that works. Okay, right now you'll notice that the gems are on their side and kind of pointing in weird directions, and that's because the first option in this menu over here is origin. So the culettes are trying to point towards the origin, and the closest point for this particular gem is over here this way, so it's actually looking that way. Not that this is a big deal. We wouldn't use this option in this scenario. What we would want to do is click on down because maybe we're making a pendant or something. So in this example, I want the orientation of the gem to look down. Okay, so as far as that goes, you can use this menu and get to all the different controls. Or you can, if you're a typer, you can use the command line, or if you're going to script a function, you can always use the options up here. And then of course we have the control handles over here as well in the viewport. So I'll kind of show the different methods. A lot of the time if I'm adjusting the number of gems or the location of them, I find it most useful to use the control handle. But otherwise, we have start position here where we can control that, and we have end position here. Okay. The next feature that I would like to show is spacing. Okay, so the spacing is set to 0.2. So that coincides with this up here as well. Okay, so there's two methods to control the spacing of the gems. One is spacing and then one is fixed. Okay, and I'll come back to fixed, but I'm going to leave it on spacing. My spacing is set to 0.2. But what you may or may not notice is that when I move these, the spacing starts to get further apart or closer together. Because what the program is doing is it's trying to fit the gems between the two yellow dots, and it's adjusting them so that until you get to where you need to add another gem, there it just added one. And by the way, you can see the number of gems right here. The gem count is right here. So there we have 14. If you keep your eye over there, now we have 13, and so on. Now, the idea here is to get the proper spacing so that when we order the gems, depending on how close they are in size, we have enough to set the stones, but we also don't want big gaps between the gems. So in order to give a visual representation of that, we've got this button right here, which is Enable Halos. And so it just puts a circle around, or an outline around the gem. And right now, the halo is 0.1 millimeters away from the girdle of the stone. Okay? And you can see that I'm looking for a spacing of 0.2. So we know this is not 0.2 because there's 0.1 and there's 0.1. So there's your visual representation right away saying, my gap is probably too big. And so then as I move this closer, okay, it's getting closer, but it's not exact. And that's where you would want to come over here and switch from spacing to fixed. And then the program will jump over and go, okay, I'm not going to let you do anything as far as moving these closer or further apart, I'm going to make it exact. Now you might say, well, why don't I always just want fixed? Well, maybe you do. I don't know. I wasn't there at the time. But sometimes it's more important to get a good overall fit from one side of an object to another in your jewelry, and maybe the gap doesn't have to be exact. Okay, so that's why the two different methods. And then when I move this, you'll see over here, if you watch over here, it's not until there's enough room does it add another stone. So it's going, it's moving, and pop, there it comes. So now it can add another. Okay, so that's how fixed and then spacing, and then the halos are just a visual representation of that. So what I tend to do is, depending on what the client's looking for, if you're modeling for somebody, I find that each particular jewelry store kind of has their own overall tolerance for how close they'll let these gems get, so that when we actually go to set them in the real world, there will be enough space. And so you can get very particular with this. If you want your spacing to be 0.15 millimeters instead of 0.2, well, then what you can do is you can, I usually just double click there and go 0.15, okay, and hit enter. And there you can see that that is now overlapping, okay? Those are overlapping because my halo is 0.1. So half of that, of course, would be 0.075, and we'll hit enter there, okay? And now you'll see that my spacing is indeed 0.15 and 0.075 here. So you can get very precise, and that visual representation of those halos, it's just your cue that is indeed what's going on. Okay, so that's how the spacing, whether it's fixed or spacing, and then the halos and the spacing value that's hard set between the gems, that's how that works. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at a different setup. Okay, so here I have a size 7 finger rail, okay, and I have a gem, or a curve for my gem curve out here. Now, typically it's not a great idea to use the finger rail to place your gems. Number one, you don't want the girdle on the finger rail, and if you move out away from that, your spacing gets really weird. So I always just start out with a curve out here. And so let's go ahead and select the curve, click here. Now, this is my old setup, okay? So I have 0.15, I have 0.075, and that may not be what I want for this one, because the builder always goes back in the session that you're in. It always goes back to where you last left off, which only makes sense because you might be working on the same section of a ring, okay? So you'll also notice that the gems are pointing in weird directions again, and that's because we're looking down, or trying to, okay? And so we want to switch this back to origin so that all the gems point to the origin now. However, I don't really want to have to go type this, and so on. So I'm going to go up to the preset library button and go over here and hit reset, okay? And that will reset the builder to the default settings, which is 0.1, 0.2, and so on. Okay, so now that we're back, if the gems are to be laid out along this line, this outside curve, okay, you get the truest representation of what's going on between the gems when the girdle is on the line, okay? So as you can see, if we come over to vertical offset or go out into the viewport and then move this in, the closer we get, or the further away we get from the white line, closer to the finger rail, you can see that the gems start to collapse on themselves because they have to. They're being drawn away from the line. And since the line is circular, it obviously is starting to collapse. Same thing here, they'll get further away the further away you go. Okay, so that's fine. We can control the spacing. Okay, so if we go here and then just move away from, and I'll go ahead and move it on each side. Now we can change the spacing, and then our 0.2 distance remains, and there you can see I got 0.1, 0.1, or 0.2, and so then we can do that. Now, the problem is I went over and I moved one side, and I moved the other side, and now I'm not centered. In this particular scenario, it appears to me that this gap should be centered, okay? And so we'll want to switch from this method and turn on mirror, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll turn on mirror, and then let's drive this way, okay? So there's the end, and this is the mirror point. Okay, so I'm going to drive this up here. Okay, so there's that, and that snaps right there. And then I can go ahead and move away from that. And now I'm even on each side. Okay, and I have spacing on again, so you can see that at any given time. Let's go ahead and go to perspective so we can see from this view. There I'm overlapping, and there I can move that. And so there I'm even on the center and even on each side here, and I've moved away from this curve, okay, to show you how we can control that. But depending on what the layout is that you want, maybe we'll move this back. And if you want to get this back perfectly, then what you need to do is come over to the offset, and the easiest way is to type 0 and hit enter. And now we know that the girdle is dead set against the rail. And then maybe I want to change the size of the stones like so. Okay. And then we can control the spacing here as well, and there is that. Okay, so it ended up that we had 2.9 millimeter, so those are pretty big, but that would work out just fine. Okay, let's take a look at another option in the menu, which is the shape of the gem. Right now we're working on round, which is probably 98% of the time, but we can switch this to princess, okay, and easily get that. The spacing still works out to be the same. If you want more spacing between that, we would just come over here and maybe change that to 0.25, and then drive these together until we get down to about what that would be, or switch it to fixed, and now we are 0.25 away. Now my halo is set to 0.1, so if we want to change that to 0.125 and hit enter, then you can see that that's when it's going to add or remove a gem off that. Okay, let's go with something a little more interesting, perhaps a marquee. And you're like, okay, but I want those to go end to end, or point to point rather. So then we can come over to rotation and turn these, okay. But let's change this to be 90, okay, and hit enter. And then we need to change the spacing to be quite a bit. That's when I jump over here, okay, and I use the handle. Okay, so that just like you know, who knew that you should be at 4.43, right? So um, there's how you can quickly, using the halos and whatever that distance is. So let's say, okay, I know I want, well, it's 0.125, so I know that that is 0.25 between there, and so that's where the halos really help with what you're laying out. Okay, let's do another example. Okay, in this next example, we have a ring that's, you know, almost done. We've got it set up, and then we have this inset, and we want to go ahead and put gems on this inset. All right, so I've got my curve here, so I'll select that curve, come over to gems, and start gem on curve, and you can see that we're pointing the orientation of the gem at the origin, and that's not doing me any good. And of course, down isn't going to do any good. What we want to do is we want to point those gems at an object. So we click Object, and it says select surface, curve, or point to orient to. And I'll go ahead and click there. So now we have our gems coming out. And they're looking right at the surface, okay? And so the next thing I want to do is change the size, and I want a larger stone here and a smaller stone here. So we're going to go over and turn on taper gems, okay? And so I'll go over and drive this gem, okay, over to that side, and then I'm going to increase this to about 2.1. And that looks like it fills to have a slight gap here and here, and maybe we come back a little, I don't know. And then I'm going to come over here, and you can also use the handle here as well for the, we can either switch it to end size or come over and use the handle. And I'm going to take it down to, let's go to 1.1 right there. And then as I move that and give it room, it will jump that 1.1 in there. And then I can kind of tweak this. I want to make sure I leave room at the end for prongs. Here and here should be fine. And here should be fine. So there I've got my halo and giving me a visual on my spacing. And that's how we do that. And then what you'll notice is that Joule Beetle takes a look at the gems in between, and we do sizes to the 10th. So in other words, we don't give you a 1.56 and a 1.28 and a this and a that. We control the sizing so that when you go to source these gems, they're not you know, a really particular size. We go ahead and stick to tenths, and that way it's a pretty it's a good layout, but with gems that aren't a crazy size as far as that goes. And so now we just, one thing I haven't really done in this whole video is actually commit the gems. Oh, the other thing we could do too, though, before I do that, is we could move these up a little bit if we were going to set those a particular way in prongs, or if we were going to actually cut the metal and bead set these, we might leave the girdles down. If we were going to set them in prongs, maybe we'd move them up a little bit. And then I just hit enter on the keyboard, and there we go. That is that. In case nobody has seen in Joule Beetle so far, in order to mirror this over here very quickly, and over here in properties, there you can see 1 1 1 3 5 8 2 1. Control F1, hold down Control, press F1, and we get them on this side. Okay. And then if we select both these and then hit Control F2, we get them on this side. So Control F1 is across the y-axis, Control F2 across the x-axis. All right, so there is how the taper function works. Okay, here's another quick example of doing taper, so small, bigger to smaller, but I'm going to turn mirror on as well. So it's nothing new that we haven't already covered. It's just combining a couple of those, and so I thought it might be nice to show that. So here I have a ring, has this little hoop deal on it, and we want to put stones here. And so I'm going to go ahead and select the curve and go over to gems and gem on curve. And here again, we need to combine pretty much kind of what we've explored so far. And that is the first thing we need to do is point the gems to an object, which is this one. And then we need to turn on mirror. Okay, so now we have the mirror point here. And I'm going to snap to the midpoint of that. Okay, and then I'm going to turn taper gems on. Okay, and the first one, let's make it bigger to fill this space. And so we'll go up to 2. So that looks kind of healthy right there. And then we'll come over here and make this one 1. And then drive it toward those. And I'm just looking at my halos, and I'm pretty much there as far as whatever I want my spacing to be. And that's how you can do that. It's really pretty straightforward. So this is mirroring from dead center each way, and I'll hit enter and commit those gems. Okay, I've got one more scenario to show, one function that we haven't explored, and it's actually kind of my favorite in this builder. So let's do that next. Okay, in this last example for gem on curve, I actually want to show a couple things that have been problematic in the past. And so let's go ahead and I'm going to take the time to come up to extract iso curve, and I'm going to click on this surface, and I'm going to snap to the middle of this, mid here. Okay, and then I'm going to run that command again by right clicking and select this surface, and then I'll snap right to the end of that curve. Okay, and then I'll select both curves and hit J for join and hit enter. And so those two curves are joined into one open curve. And I'm not going to rebuild this curve. So I've extracted an iso curve and I've joined them. In the past, that could be problematic, and the spacing between the gems might be pretty erratic. And so let's go ahead, and I guess when I say in the past, I'm saying about other programs. And so now I'm going to go over to gems and come over here. And let's drive my size up to 1.7, okay? And the customer has 20 1.7 rounds, so we want 10 on this side and 10 on this side, okay? Right now my gem count is 9, okay? And let's say I start lining this up, and I'm like, okay, I like that there, I think. And then I'm going to pull this down, and now I have 10. Okay, and I'm actually going to switch this from spacing to fixed, okay, because I want this to be exact. So I do that. And then I'm like, okay, cool. That's good. And I got my 10, I hit enter, and then I start looking at this, and I go, you know, I really don't want this big a gap from the top. I want this to be up here. So you can edit the gem on curve, okay? And so if we select this and simply go back to the builder, so here I'm going to go back to command history. It's real easy to get right up there. And it'll edit that last set. Okay, well, rather than move this up and perhaps introduce another gem, then I'll have 11. Then I have to come down here and move this one up, and I go back and forth until I have 10 again. What I can do is lock the start and end position. So I click here, and then when I move this one, it just moves this as a unit. And I just think that's a really nice feature that we've added so that you can tweak this and nothing else changes other than the location of the start, or it doesn't matter, you can move the end. It doesn't matter which one you grab. And then we can get that tucked up here and nothing else changed. Still have 10 stones, and then we just hit enter and away we go. So we'll do Control F1 there, and there's our gem layout. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers Gem on Curve, and thanks for watching. See ya.